fighting organisation. Thanks very much for joining us, Elroy.
Thank you.
You were actually in the lockup where you get to go through all the documents pertaining to the budget. What stood out for you from a human rights perspective?
Okay. Thank you. What stood out immediately to us was in his speech, he writes as if he's having a schizophrenic conversation. He says there are constraints and difficulties, and then he says, but we must be resilient. We can overcome this. And so one of the things that struck me the most about what the minister said and tried to do was, first of all, he did not increase VAT. There was huge pressure to increase VAT. And for years, civil society organizations and trade unions have said, don't do that, because then you punish poorer people disproportionately. That's the first thing that was good. I think one of the good things that the minister did, along with the Treasury, was address the fees must fall issue, in that they managed to find the resources to keep the prices of 2016 stable and the same value as 2015, and managed to write off some of the debt issues. In difficult times, that's commendable. What also stood out to me was something that saddened me very much. The Black Sash works in the social assistance, social security sector. And I think it's one of the first times where, when you do the annual adjustment on a huge amount of money, we're talking about 140 billion rand, about 3.3% of the GDP. For the first time, the grants allocation, just nominally, didn't keep up with inflation. And that to us was a sad thing. And if you adjust it for the real value of the rand using the CPI of about 6.6, then the value is even less. So that people applaud for the 80 rand that the GoGo gets, which is now 1,500 rand. But we know with food prices increases coming, with water prices and access to water being more scarce, it disproportionately affects poor families, women and rural people. So I think more could have been done in that regard.
Obviously, for your rural Koko, having maybe a grant of 3,000 rand a month would be more preferable. But we know that the finance minister has a juggling act to play. And at the end of the day, there's so many variables that need allocations and need to be prioritized. So, how else can he do it?
It is a long process that got us to where we are, especially in terms of social assistance. What has happened is that over the last 10-15 years, the Black Sash and other organizations were instrumental in calling for the extension of the child support grant up until the age of 18, and that happened. I think when pundits and the market are critical of the state intervention, the state's role in the economy, it is necessary to point out to public expenditure wastage. It's necessary to say you've got to trim the fat in the public sector. But so often, the real crooks get away. And what was not mentioned was the predatory practices of some financial companies, especially in the financial insurance and credit industry, that the Treasury in its market inquiry report said is engaging in abusive behavior. You know that some of these gogos who are not literate, who are grantees, are being ripped off by unlawful deductions of airtime, of electricity, sometimes fraudulent theft. We managed to have some of these fraudulent deductions taken off. So I think what the minister could have done and what the state could have done is accelerate the intervention to stop these practices.
We have acts like the National Credit Act. Are you suggesting that perhaps their ability to enforce things is just not working?
There have been a raft of legislation that has recently been tabled. The Twin Peaks legislation, the draft insurance bill, in particular the draft regulations to amend what are Regulation 26A deductions. The one deduction allowed for funeral insurance, that has all been tightened up. What is necessary is for that message to be communicated between the three spheres of government and for political will to make sure that the law takes the effect.
Elroy, thank you so much for your time. That was Elroy Poyser. He's from Black Sash. And now we're going to